Thanks, Casey. I'm psyched to be here, in part because it was pretty much right about exactly this time in 1995 at American University in a room not unlike this that my career in fighting for freedom and fighting for legalization began. It was a few months before Prop 215, the medical cannabis ballot initiative in California, passed here in '96. You know, I was a freshman in college, and well, by that point I was a sophomore, but it had all started with a libertarian club on campus that I was a freshman and I hadn't really heard much libertarian ideas, and then someone was telling me about how, you know, personal freedom, economic freedom. I wasn't so sure about the economic freedom part, but I was 100% sure on the personal freedom part and felt a real passion for it. And I was never a big reader, but all of a sudden I found myself just reading more and more and more about drug policy and being like, oh my God, this is false. This is a racket. Oh my God, I have to do something about this. And I found myself reading, like, way late into the night, reading books on drug policy reform, and I'm like, I think this might be a sign. And so that's how I got involved, but it was through a libertarian club on my campus that I got introduced to these ideas in the first place. So it's great to be talking to folks who are in the exact same position I was back then. And we were in a very different place when it comes to marijuana policy than we are now. And each of us has a, you know, it starts in each spot, and so each group of people has something that they're meant to carry for the rest of humanity, I guess, if you want to call it that. And for us, it was nothing had ever passed. I mean, there was in 1996 there was no medical marijuana laws. There was no ballot initiatives that had ever won. Most people, if you said you were working to make marijuana legal, they would have laughed at you or said, you know, I'm with you. Don't tell anybody, and good luck, right? Like, this is not like, this is you're barking up the wrong tree, basically. But you're in college, that's what you're supposed to do, right? And then here, this ballot initiative in California, it starts making national headlines. I'm here in Washington, D.C., and the drug czar is going to be coming to speak at American University, and we're like, we're going to host a protest, you know. So we gather everybody up, we make up signs, everything else. Well, it turns out C-SPAN is covering it. So the first event I ever throw is 2 months before the biggest policy change in history on marijuana policy, and the drug czar is coming and C-SPAN's there. So the very first thing gets on national television on C-SPAN, and I realized, wait a second, one person who just yells out something and comes up with an idea, I was shown very early on could make this huge impact, and people were seeing, we dressed people up in doctor's scrubs and put them in handcuffs and paraded them in front of the thing. I mean, when do you ever see protests on C-SPAN, right? And so right off the bat it was like, wait a second, we can really make a difference, and I was hooked after that. I was just completely hooked. And here we are today, 2 months from a similar world-changing potential event with Prop 19 being on the ballot in November, which would make cannabis legal in the state of California for adults. And we're 2 months away, and so I start this presentation, even though we're going to be talking a lot more about the business and stuff like that, my heart is really in the activism of all of this. And so I present you with a challenge of what are you going to do with the next 2 months that we have to make history here in California. So that's sort of a little bit of an opening. I'm going to try and keep my prepared kind of remarks pretty short because I'm curious what you guys want to know from me, and I particularly like the back and forth of question and answer more than presenting. But I'll talk a little bit about sort of what I'm doing today and how I got here and what I think is in store for the new legal cannabis industry. It's very much, it used to be a question of if cannabis will be legal. And now it's really changed to how and when it's going to be legal. And people aren't waiting for the politicians. They're not waiting for government to get its act together. People are going ahead, they're getting out there, they're starting cannabis businesses, they're starting ancillary businesses around it, and people are positioning themselves for this new market that's starting to burst up all over the place. And one of the main reasons why I shifted from the nonprofit side and fundraising for political change is that I started to realize, being the liaison to the industry for the nonprofit world, that the for-profit or the business side of this was starting to have more power than the nonprofit side almost. Because not only because of the money, because they were able to fund things, but also because when a business opened and a dispensary opened, that was activism, right? How that dispensary presented itself to the public made a difference in how the public decided to vote. So the business side of it really makes a huge difference, because there's such a stigma associated with cannabis, and I believe that we have a responsibility to the future of freedom of cannabis, that we make this new industry something that we can be proud of and something that the public can respond positively to, and so that we can take this. The public is starting to slowly hand over to entrepreneurs something that's really sensitive for a lot of people. This is like, oh, I don't know. So they're afraid about kids, and they're afraid about crime, and they're afraid about people going on to harder drugs. They're afraid of all of these things. So how do we take that responsibility, and how do we present ourselves in a way that makes them feel comfortable with cannabis in their communities and teaching responsible use, etc., etc. And unfortunately, that's not necessarily what I see propping up in a lot of the nooks and crannies of this industry. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to get on that side of it, so I can have a say in the future of that. And the way I came to that was I was raising money from the people in the cannabis industry, but also then people not in the cannabis industry for policy change. And what I found was that people that are outside the cannabis industry were looking in going, wow, this is really interesting. And they had all these ideas and all this, they wanted to get in on it, right? And then you had people on the cannabis industry side who had all these ideas but didn't have any money and didn't have the professionalism that comes from the business world and everything else. And I'm like, wow, I know all the people on either side of this. Here's an opportunity to help bridge that gap as we move into this new era. And it's interesting with this, because there's a lot of things about the cannabis industry that are totally different than other emerging markets. You know, when we had the .com and the green tech booms, right? Both of those booms came out of something new, right? There was something new, and these new companies were coming up and they were selling something new that people hadn't heard of before to a new market. They were creating new markets for these things. The cannabis industry already exists. It just exists underground. And so we're not talking about a new market like the .com or the green tech boom. We're not talking about opening up some new space. We're talking about a space that already exists, that's surfacing, becoming from a criminal enterprise to an above ground enterprise, and it's all happening slowly, state by state, county by county, as things are starting to surface. And so this is quite different. There's really nothing in history that compares to it. I mean, we had repeal of alcohol prohibition, but that was different. I mean, it was legal just a couple years prior to it. So everybody that was alive remembered it when it was legal, then remembered it when it was illegal, and then remembered it again when it was legal. Whereas there's very few people alive today that remember when cannabis was legal in 1936. Not to mention there was not much of that much of a market for cannabis then. Anyway, so this is totally new. It's on the frontier, and so if you're interested in being on the frontier of a new industry, and on the frontier of law, and on the frontier of business, and on the frontier of freedom, I mean, there's nothing else but but what's happening here? And if you're into personal freedom and economic freedom, there's really no other libertarian issue that's moving so quickly in the direction of libertarianism than cannabis. And so that's really, really drew me into it. And I was lucky enough to team up with Steve D'Angelo from Harborside Health Center in this endeavor. And it was really the first person I pitched my idea to, and he immediately was like, wait a second, I got people every day coming to me with new ideas for new companies, and I don't have enough people and enough resources to help people get started with it. And so as soon as I pitched him on this, it was immediate. He was like, yes, let's do it. And so we teamed up with the goal of starting and investing in the most promising ancillary businesses to the cannabis industry. Now, what I mean by ancillary businesses is the ArcView Group, we focus on starting and investing in companies that are doing everything related to the cannabis industry but the growing and selling of cannabis. There's already 1.5 million people fighting over dispensary permits, and there's already 1.5 million people fighting over the cultivation game. And so when people think about, I want to get in this business, the first thing they think about is becoming a dispensary operator or a grower. So what we're interested in is the blue ocean, where there's not much fighting going on over the market, which is on all the things that serve this changing market. And so we focus on things that are the answer to this question. As cannabis becomes more legal throughout the country, and more cannabis use becomes a legal transaction, and more people come out of the closet, how are the needs of cannabis consumers, cannabis retailers, and cannabis growers going to change? How are they going to change as that shift happens? The answer to that question is the answer to the kinds of businesses we're interested in participating in. So one of our first projects